Eric. Eric is in the live stream right now, which is cool. So thanks, Eric, for organizing all of this. And thank you so much, Sanity, for hosting us. We really appreciate it. And we will have 2 talks today. The first one is by me. I will be talking about how I use Remix and just my abstraction layer on top of that. And then Knut will talk about global content patterns with Remix and Sanity. Really excited for that one. And I just get started. Cool. So I want to talk about my abstraction layer on top of Remix. And my name is Andre. I'm a developer from Germany. I currently work at LinkedIn and live in Cupertino. Every Monday, I tutor aspiring developers in a meetup. And in general, I love building for the web. Before I get started, I'm on a Remix hype train, so I have to kind of share that a little bit. 3 things that have kind of happened since our last meetup that is kind of cool. Yesterday was Next.js Conf. A lot of things were happening. One thing I want to share is that Dan Abramov, one of the core, I think he's the core member of the React team, kind of reflected on that on Twitter. And one of his reflections is that he thinks that React is not only a library now, but also an architecture that is implemented by frameworks. So I think that's a really cool take. Wanted to share that. Kenzie Dodds published a really cool blog article that he called The Next Transition of the Web, I think. Really nice, like, view back where we came from, like all the different steps we took, different technologies. And I think the reason he did that is kind of to say that frameworks like Remix are like the next step. There's something new. They're not really a single page application anymore because they do more things than that. And then he coined the term PESPA, progressively enhanced single page application, to kind of give it a new name. Yeah, want to share that. And lastly, Ryan Florence, one of the creators of Remix also, promotes this 3-step process to developing user experiences or UI. Make it work with just HTML, no JavaScript, forms, HTTP, the web platform. And then once you're done, you can, deploy, go on the weekend, relax a little bit. And if you feel like it, you can do step 2, which is actually enhance the experience with JavaScript. It's optional, but obviously we want dynamic experience these days, so do it. So enhance the experience with JavaScript. But what you have to keep in mind when you start doing this, you will actually make the experience worse first before it gets better, because you lose the default behavior of the browser in many ways. And then you have to re-implement that and go from there. I will actually attempt to live code in a second. This is also just an introduction to how we will get started. We will enhance, but first we will kind of degrade the experience. And then the 3rd step is, once you have added JavaScript everywhere, right? It's a crazy single page application now. You kind of want to still reflect what of the logic you can move to the server, where the business logic should live as much as possible and kind of like clean up, I guess. Cool, but let's talk hooks. I always say that Remix provides thoughtfully designed primitives, conventions, and levers. As a framework, right, it provides conventions like file and folder naming conventions, so you have to configure less stuff. Primitives, every library exposes some kind of API function that you're calling. And levers in Remixes, everything is about like providing your options, different options for how you build UI, what web vitals you want to optimize for. Today we will be talking about primitives. React hooks are a way to compose UIs. They're reusable functions. And let's just quickly go through the hooks that Remix provides. Remix provides a bunch of hooks, actually. One of them is use loaded data and use matches. That's just how you get the data from the server. Use transition and use fetchers. That's how you read transition states and stuff like that. Use location data, use search params, use fetcher, use submit, use action data, use search params, use fetchers, use catch, use navigation. Oops, yeah, those were all, and I probably missed some. So the point I'm trying to make here is that Remix provides a lot of tools, right? Primitives that you can use to compose the UI together. And all those hooks have different use cases and serve different things and have different capabilities. But in the end of the day, you want to use them to create your UI, right? Like those are the tools that you're using. But they will never match one-to-one. Like rarely will you have a feature where you use one hook and that's it, right? Like that's the starting point. But most of the time, what's the UI use case? You submit something, and then a success message pops up, but after 5 seconds, it should disappear again, right? That's nothing Remix really does out of the box. You will need like several hooks and some business logic. And then you have this like piece of code that you then yourself can abstract again to a function call that you can reuse. And that's kind of what I want to show you today, is kind of my abstraction layer on top of Remix to make my life easier for myself. So let's go to the code. I guess let's go to the page first. Okay, I have a highly dynamic application here, a message board that we have 3 different versions, a final version that I'm trying to implement, and then we have a ludicrous version that I will just tease at the end. This is the cool things you can build with Remix. That's kind of like what I see is the future. But we start here on the default message board, where we can just fill out this form and submit a message. And if you look at the favicon up here, you see it did like a little loading indication, right? That's because we did a full page reload, right? We submitted a form, welcome back to 2000. And the same with the like buttons, up and down voting of a message, full page reload every time. But it works. So there's really no JavaScript on the client right now. It's reasonably fast, but also because it's all localhost and I'm writing to a JSON file. But I mean, it works, right? Like you can go have fun with your family or whatever and come back and then enhance from there. So that's what we're going to do. The page itself is a component, right? Reg component. And then we have this edit message on the left side and all messages on the right side. So all we will deal with today is 3 components, and they are all in the same file. And we have a list of to-dos that we will implement. Some server-side code to write stuff to the database. We really don't care that much. So this is an action function that Remix provides that we post the data to. Then we have a Remix loader. That's where we get the data from on the server. And here we have our first component. This is the message entry. So one of those list elements is one of the messages you saw in the list. And here we have the upvote and downvote button, and it's just a form. And we post it to our same page, and each submit button has a little intent and value, and that's how we see, based on this value, we know on the server that we should upvote or downvote. So the first thing we want to do now is enhance the experience, right? Step 2 of the UI process of building UIs. So let's replace this with the form component from Remix. So instead of just using an HTML form, we're using a real form. By the way, who of you has watched the Remix singles on YouTube and the Remix YouTube channel? One person. I can highly encourage you all to watch those videos, even if you're not that interested in Remix or you're just getting started with web in general. They're like the most educative videos I've seen on the web. So here we have the second component, message form. This is when you create a new message, right? You have an input field and a text area and a submit button. And we also gonna change this form up to a real Remix form. So what this component does behind the scenes, it's going to prevent the default submit. So you don't do the browser default behavior. You don't have the loading span anymore. Instead, it will do a real fetch, like a fetch call, like you would do in an SPA all the time, right? Cool. Let's see how this goes. You refresh the page real quick. This JavaScript. The favicon shouldn't reload anymore. Yeah. And also no reloads here. Sweet. So congratulations, we kind of enhanced the experience now. We're doing what SPAs do, fetching, but we declared the fetch call declarative with a form, which itself is already neat, right? You need less code. It's nice to write it as a form. You use the web platform. But we don't have any loading indications anymore because we got rid of the page reload. That was our indication for the user, actually something's happening. Also, the form is not reset anymore, which kind of sucks, right? Like it should clear itself. And we actually degraded the experience now, right? It got worse because we're using JavaScript, but we don't do our job. So the next step now is, let's follow our to-do list. Show loading indication on message form submit. So we will get the submitting loading indication back. So we go to a form component where we have our submit message button. And in here, we will do something like this. Is submitting. Otherwise, the old message. Cool. So obviously we have to define the variable. So we already handled the success state and the failed state. And we use this with remix hooks, right? Loader data to get server-side data. We get our message entries. Use action data to get the response whenever we submit. And then based on the response, we just check this JSON response data that we got from the server to see if there was an error or success state. So we will add the transition. This is another hook from Remix, right? And we're talking about composing different hooks together. We're already using 3 now. Transition is the global transition state of a page that Remix provides for you. And using this hook, you can do something like this. Almost submitting. Sometimes I feel like GitHub Copilot actually makes my life worse, right? And we should probably throttle a little bit so we can actually. Yay. Okay, so we have a submit message, right? Fair enough. Our next to do is, this is all Remix right now. Our abstraction layer comes in this step. So bear with me for 1 second. Now we will reset the form on every successful submit. So cleaning up after what we do. So we use just React for this. There's really no Remix in use here. We use one of those beloved use effects. And we depend on the has succeeded state. And if we has succeeded, then we want to reset the form. For that, we need access to the HTML element. So this is just React, use ref to get the reference of the underlying form. Very common that we do that in React, but TypeScript is complaining because this has to be an HTML form element. And the default value is null. So if we have succeeded right after our submit, thanks Copilot, we will see if there's a current HTML form element, and if there is, we reset it. And that's just DOM, a DOM function call. So hashtag use the platform, I guess. So let's move this. Reset me. Sweet. All right. One more thing checked. Great. I'm happy that I don't run into any issues yet. Cool. Okay, so now we actually will start using my functions. That will also get a little bit more complicated, but that's kind of the point, right, of an abstraction layer. So you don't have to think about that stuff all the time. You just use the functions. Firstly, every element in our list of messages is an entry. And every entry has an ID, name, message, likes, and then also a date. So what I want to do now is, as you can see in the final version, we nicely show when the message was posted, and we kind of want to add that now as well. So we will go to our list element, and in here, we just copy paste this markup code. So on top of the message, we will also just add the created at, and then we will, let's just get the time just to see what happens, right? Like TypeScript tells us this is a date. So let's get the time and see if that works. Oh no, an error. Not set up at all. So why is there an error? So if we go down, this is our actual message board here. And here we get from the loader data right on the server, we get our entries, our messages. And then down here, we map over our messages and pass them to this component. And here I convinced TypeScript that everything is fine and light so that I can produce this arrow. So the issue here is that the entry that we get from over the server is not actually what we expect. So if you hover over it, we see it's called serialized object, undefined to optional entry instead of just entry. And that is because when we get data over the network, right, we get a response back or something. That's just JSON data. And JSON doesn't support any date objects. We can only have string, number, Boolean, right? So what we do with Remix, which is really cool, is you get the server-side data using this hook, and then you can, this is the function that gets at the data, and Remix will infer the type of the response for you for TypeScript, which is really cool. But Remix also politely lets us know that it's not really what we're expecting, because over the network stuff is different, right? It's stringified. So it's your job now to kind of parse it back. So we have to like do something like entries dot created, I guess the first entry, right? And then create at. So if you hover over it right now, it's a string, right? So we would need to override it. This somehow, right? Like make it back into a date. But we will maybe use our message a lot of times, right? Like we use loader data all over our application. So it would be nice if this is just handled for us and we can use this in our components. So I create this hook for me, and I create one of those hooks for every data entity that I use in my applications. And it's just called use entries, because we're working with message entries here, and it returns the entries. And I think we have one more usage of use loader data up here. Let's do this here. All right, so if we hover over entries now, we can see it's actually an entry array now. And if you go back to the page and refresh, oh, then we have to go to our entries and to local type. I guess that works. Cool. So now it's nicely formatted. It's a date again. We can call the date functions on it. It doesn't throw an error. So let's see what my hook is doing under the hood. So use entries. So it's kind of involved. I will just vaguely go over it. First of all, use matches is probably my favorite hook in Remix. And use matches gives us access to all the loader data of all the different routes. So use loader data is really neat. If you're in one route module, right, you have the loader that returns the server-side data, you have the action that gives you the response data back where you do the mutations, and you have your React component. And if you use loader data, you can access the data from that one loader. But if you're in a nested route, right, and in that nested route, you also have loader data, you won't be able to access the other's route loader data anymore, because you can only access that one of your current route. Doesn't mean it isn't available. There's just another hook you're using, you have to use, and that one is called use matches. And use matches gives you all the route modules that are currently on the page, and then you have access to those loader data. And Remix utils is like a very popular library for helper functions for Remix, and they have a similar hook to my hook here that is called use route data, I think. But that one was a little too, I don't know, annoying to work with for my little hobby projects, because for route, you have to kind of pass the route ID, and then it gives you the route data back. So my implementation is just, I give you the key of the object that I'm looking for. In any of the routes, find me the first one that has this key and give it back to me. Like I just have this convention, I will only return the user once in one loader. All the videos and recommended, I don't know, purchases, I will only return them once. So just give it from me, give it to me. Like I don't want to memorize the route IDs. That's too much. So use matches data as my first hook that I implemented. And then following up is use deserialize, which is just super generic. If we look into it, it basically takes an object, memoizes it, and deserializes it. And the deserializing is doing nothing else than recursively going over all the properties. And if there's a graded at or updated at in there, we turn it back into a date. So it's only good for my use cases. Basically, if there's anything else that has to be deserialized, I would add it here. But the nice thing is having this abstracted in the hook is I don't have to look at this at all anymore. I know it works, and now it's just one abstraction layer below, and I don't have to bother. So and then this stuff, if you haven't seen this invariant, this is just making TypeScript happy and at runtime checking that we actually have the right objects. So we just check if the entries that we now have gotten from any route and then deserialized, that they're actually an entry array. So we just check if it's an array and if all the properties are done. It's just like a little check for us and also for TypeScript. And then return the entries. So this is a lot, I know, but the nice thing now is now that we have this abstraction layer, imagine we have a new entity in our application, right? Let's say we have a user or something, right? I would just create a new hook like this, call it use user. Check out how I return it, right? It will probably be the user key in one loader. Call use deserialize on it with this, and we'll change the type guards to check if it's actually a user object, and we're done. So once the abstraction layer is there, it's really nice to work with, and that's kind of the whole point of an abstraction layer, I guess. So use matches data and use deserialize my first two hooks here. Let's see if we broke something. Okay, good. Back to our to-dos, because we can now show the created ad and we can access the data all over our application. We are happy. So next, I brought this up earlier. We have this green success message. So now we want to hide it after 5 seconds. You know, we show it and it's not an error message. It's not really important. The user will be annoyed if it's just there, right? Like the state should reset. So remix state is not resetting. Once you get the action data and you're not doing anything with the page, the actions data is persisting on the client, I guess, and it's still there. So you have to kind of create your own logic on top of that to reset that state after a timeout. So we go to our little form, message form. So here we check if there's error, right? We check if it has succeeded, and we're also checking if it's submitted and using the global transition object. So this is a bunch of code that I would need to write for every form that I'm writing. Every time register, log in, I don't know, create new project, I would need those things anyway. So let's abstract them away. And this neat little hook that is called use form state. And that is now another of my abstraction layers. And use form state gives us information about if something has failed or succeeded or is submitting. And then the little feature on top basically is that form state, you can pass it a number in milliseconds, or just never if you never want to. And then it will start a timeout every time something has succeeded. And after that timeout, it will reset the state of has succeeded. So just a very simple timeout layer on top of us Remix already provides us. So if we go here and refresh, success should disappear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Blah. So now this little green error success measure disappears as it should after a certain amount of time. Sweet. Hide success message, success. Next and lastly, show error indication on like form submit. So currently we have this like form here. Oh yeah, we will talk about this in 1 second. So the like form is currently also tied to the local global transition state of the add message. And also we don't see if there's ever an error, there's no indication that it has failed, right? So like, let's solve both those problems. So whenever you see this happening in a Remix app, that should trigger you to use fetcher instead of the normal form component. Whenever you have a form on the page in Remix, that one is tied to the global transition object. So when you submit that form, it will trigger is submitting for the whole page. So I'm reading this over here, right? Is it submitting? Is it not? So if you're submitting over here, it will also think we have submitted over there. And this is what you're seeing. In general, I would say whenever you have a list of things and everything in the list has a form, that's a very good indication that you need to use fetcher. And it's also, by the way, the reason we have abstracted message entry in its own component, because you need to abstract something in its own component to have a hook. You can't like have a dynamic amount of hooks in React. So fetcher is use fetcher. So this is Remix now, Remix hook here. And the fetcher object has a form on it that is tied to that one fetcher. So every message entry now has a fetcher, and every fetcher, we can check it out, has a data object. So that's not the global action data. It's tied to that one fetcher. And every fetcher has its own state, and we can check that own state if it's submitting. So they're basically their own little entities. But the cool thing about this versus just doing a real fetch is that you can, first of all, still write it in this declarative way, you form, right? Like instead of doing like an use effect or like use callback and then you submit in there, you still can write it with HTML. And second of all, this, as I showed in the beginning, but I can also prove it later by disabling JavaScript. Nice vibes, yeah. This will work without JavaScript. And that's really the big advantage, right? This is progressively enhancing. If JavaScript is not loaded, this will still be a form on the page that you can submit, and it will do a full page reload again. All right, so fetcher form. So by using this, we should now have, no more flickering submitting state, because now it's every of those little up and down voting forms has their own loading state now, like life cycle. Cool. But we also wanted to show an error indication. So if we go to our database, we can enable errors. This is just writing to a JSON file. And then if we are back here, we can bring in one of my abstraction layers, layers, use fetcher state. So this is almost the same as the form state that I showed earlier. So it returns exactly the same things, but now on a fetcher level, like scope down basically. And we just care about has failed. We don't need a loading indication or anything. And we need to pass it the fetcher that we care about. And then theoretically, we don't use this right now, but we can also give it a timeout again, after which it should reset the state. So down here, we show the likes. And basically, we just will do this like if he has failed. Yes, let's do this. It's funny, I tested this talk yesterday, and GitHub Copilot gave me a crying smiley. No, it's a confused smiley. Cool. Okay, so the probability that an error occurs on the page now for the likes is like, I think 10%, so maybe we have to click a little bit. But yay. So something went wrong. And then when you click again, you will do another post attempt, right? Like another click will just be another basically post. So the state resets. So and then error again. And you can also see the loading states are not like, this is not resetting only because we do something up here, right? Same as over here. I can also be like error. No, of course. It's 50% probability. Yeah. So something went wrong over here, something over here, but it's all nicely managed, right? All the error states. And we didn't do any, at least on the client, we didn't do any like try catch, like use effect, set error state, set error message, right? Because we get all that state just from the server fed in. And then we use nicely wrapped abstraction layers on top of this, right? Like even the code inside here. Okay, I mean, I guess I abstract too much. Another abstraction layer. But down there, it's just, a timeout, syncing between two states. If you look into this is the actual computation we're doing. This is the logic behind those two hooks, use form state and use fetcher state. And it's all just using like the data that Remix provides us to check what's the current status, right? And then obviously there's a lot of things, we have to compose them together, but that's the whole point. So what I'm getting at is you have two forms here, a whole application, and it's only 170 lines of code, which I think is pretty cool. Okay, I had no errors by live coding for the first time. That was sick. Okay. One last thing. So this form is exactly the same now as the final form, but I want to show you the ludicrous form, which is kind of like where I hope the web is getting at as a default soon-ish in 10 years. So this is ludicrous. It's refresh. This is ludicrous. No, it's final. You want to go to ludicrous. Cool. So what if there are several people on the page and I don't know, this person over here downvotes. Please look to the left, look to the right. It's reactive. Is it WebSockets? No, it's server-sent events. So same also works with the message. Yeah. Reactive state with server-sent events in Remix. Of course, error. Yay. And immediately it's on both browsers, right? Imagine like you and your friends, it's like a chat, right? But it's, yeah. And yeah, I don't want to go too much in the code because I don't understand it that well. I just copy pasted all of that from people that are way smarter. He has a cool Remix demo up like every week on Twitter. But basically we have just a loader, a Remix resource loader, and we return a long-living stream response. I guess they're called event stream. And in here, we just wait for other server events to happen. And if they happen, so like if we in here learn about those events, we just forward the data and send it down the response to the client. It's like a one-way WebSocket. Okay. Are we safe? No, just kidding. And then on the ludicrous board, by the way, also same 171 lines. I didn't know anything because we use nice abstraction layers. So use reactive entries gives us an new array state that reactively updates based on server-sent events incoming. So in here, it's still the stuff that I described, right? Like we still use the Remix foundations, but based on top of that, we just listen to those things coming from the server, right? Like those events. This is like living response. We have another hook abstraction here that we use to like listen for the events. And on the client, it's just called event source. This is just DOM. Yeah, the platform basically. So this is just a few wrappers using Remix, which exposes all the stuff that the web provides us. And that's all the code we needed to make this real time. Cool. We have to click through everything now. Most of the stuff you don't actually have to code yourself like I did, because there are already a lot of cool helper packages out there. So if you want to try Remix or you're trying a Remix, I can really recommend those packages up here. There's already one for server-side events, so like the real-time stuff, the last one. So really cool. Then one last shameless plug. In mid-November, I'm speaking at RemixConf EU. It's full remote. So if you want to hop on your laptop and join us, I would love it. But also, if you have used Remix before and I don't know, you build something, maybe fill out the form that is behind this QR code, because I'm doing like a little survey, and that's going to be my my topic is basically common architectures with Remix. So if you help me out and give me an answer, I would greatly appreciate that. Sweet. Thanks for listening. Woo. Just Eric screaming. All right. Oh yeah, if you have any questions, please. One more time. What did you have to do to let the server side event? It was working the whole time. I just didn't use it before. Oh well. Okay. So the technology behind it is called server-sent events, and it's basically its own protocol, and it is like an alternative to WebSockets. It's just I mean, I can show you this. This is probably the best explanation. So this is where we kind of create the stream, right? The stream that stays open between the client and the server. And in the stream, we return a response. This is just a web fetch API response. And the only difference between an other response and this response, it's first of all, it's a stream data structure. And second of all, it's kept alive. So the connection is kept alive, right? So the server can keep sending data. And then the rest is just very similar to WebSockets, where you just emit or like push send through the stream. Yeah, I guess, because on the client you kind of initiate the connection and say like, I want to subscribe to events, and then you kind of like waiting for incoming events. And yeah, it's pub stuff, definitely. Yeah. That's a really good question. So this will only work if you have a long-running server, like not a serverless function that like dies after 5 minutes, because the connection has to be open, right? You also, like same with WebSocket servers, I think you always have to like stay open. So you need a long-running server. This is using Node.js, which is like, it's local host, but it's like running. So, at the end of the day, it's still based on purchase. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So for the live stream, Daniel was asking what kind of infrastructure you need to make this working. And the answer is what I said. Basically, you need a long-running server at least, and probably more things that I don't know that stuff. All right. Over.
Risky setup there.
Yeah. Do you have your camera? Make you host, right? Yeah.
Boom. Oops. Let's see. And then we have just wait. All right. Is it legible? Nah. What is a good theme for good accessible theme for not great projectors? High contrast, but just high contrast. This or this? You're opting for the dark mode? Very surprising. All right. Should I just dark mode everything? Is that good? Am I a pro? All right. Cool. Thanks for coming, everyone. I was like, are we getting anyone here? Or are we getting 30 people or 2 people? It's hard to say. But yeah, I'm Knut. I work here at Sanity. I was asked what is Sanity. Can I share my screen? Yeah, I can share my screen. Could I check that? No, there's screen sharing. Okay. Yeah, so I work here at Sanity, and people ask me in the course like, what is Sanity? And I'm probably going to explain that during this talk, hopefully. But yeah, I'm just like shaking off the dust from yesterday's Next.js Conf, where they presented stuff that Remix have had for a while or something. Yeah, nodding. But yeah, it's an interesting time to be alive in the JavaScript front-end framework world. And we're supposed to have a slide deck because I know that people are pretty excited by slide decks. But my keynote decided to like, nah, it's not today because Mac OS just came with a new version. By the way, did you hear about that? Like, Apple really released a new OS, but no one cared because there was Next.js Conf or something. I don't know. But anyways, no slide deck, so I will have to like explain this from just myself and this code editor. Hopefully that will turn out somewhat okay. And it's probably more apt because what we do at Sanity is to make developer tools specifically for dealing with content. And if you make a website or an app or something, there's a big chance you're probably going to deal with some content. And what we try to do is to make really sweet developer tools for dealing with that content, but also to help developers give people who aren't developers some neat tooling so they can kind of like deal with content in terms of writing it and managing it and so on. And this is a very roundabout way to say we are kind of like a CMS or a content management system. It's a loaded term, not loved by developers generally. So we try to make a system or a platform that they could like, and some do. Turns out, at least enough for us to be here. So that's good. So we deal a lot with APIs and stuff like event streams and standards and protocols and specifications. Um, and we work a lot with kind of like people who make front-end frameworks because that's often where content ends up. And that is what I'm going to talk about today. Very fancy title, like global content patterns. But I try to keep it fairly kind of simple because I find that like in many crafts, going back to kind of the simple things, like the first principles, pretty useful, even though you are kind of like experienced, I've done this for 20 years, whatever. I found it at least very useful. So yeah, um, that was kind of the intro. Let us dive into the stuff. So in front of me here and in front of you, I have like a remix project. It's pretty out of the box. It's not kind of like the new fancy stacks. It's just kind of like sim I have a colleague in the back asked for bigger code font. Yes, you can have bigger code font like that. It's better. I don't have like a lot of screen estate. So like this is kind of like too crammed, right? Yeah. Is it fine? Okay. You can watch the recording after and kind of like yeah. No. So yeah, this is a pretty out of the box create remix app kind of thing. With some additions, I have cheated a bit and like prepared. Um, But I guess the special little thing here, and this is kind of like taking us into a kind of like a product pitch, is this folder called Studio. So this is partly like what we make. This is one of the things we make. We call it Sanity Studio, and this is the editing environment. So here we have a couple of files. When you put kind of like a development server on it, they would compile and be turned into a single page application, which is Studio. And I will show you how that works now. Let's see. I'm a bit rusty on like Meetup talks. I haven't done that for a while. Let's see. npm oh npm run dev. That didn't work because it's start. So now I have like a development server, just like we have it Remix, and it loads up like a config. And mainly what this config does is to tell me or tell the studio that there's a project ID, there's project ID in the clouds that I have to connect to, and a so-called data set, which is kind of like a collection of documents, if you will. Um, and what happens then is that this code produces this application we have here in dark mode. Is it possible to see? Yeah, I guess. And it's kind of like this is set to be a blog. So there's some posts. Um, I forgot that Zoom throttles the network. And there's a forum where you can edit content, and you can publish it to content, and so on. That's pretty kind of like what you expect from a blog editor. What happens when I type in this thing is that it uses event streams, among other things, and post requests and so on. It's a form. And it syncs that to what we call a content lake, which is kind of like the document store in real time. So I was very glad that Andre brought up this, I can't say the word, kind of like, yeah, but anyways, because if we load up 2 more windows with the same application, we should be able to kind of like get the same feeling of reactive, real-timey stuff. Boom. And you can see that this other Knut is working in fields and so on. So it's kind of like a Google Docy kind of like editor experience. And it's pretty neat because then you don't have to worry about like race conditions and so on, that 2 people are kind of like overriding their changes and so on. So that's pretty neat to work with. Pretty hard to make a real-time application, but it's very fun. So that's kind of like the editor experience, and the way we set this up is again mostly code. So in this file, config file, I have something called schema types, and that gets some stuff from this file called schemas. And inside of here, we have an index file which just collects kind of like a bunch of other files. And if we dig even more deeper, we have this post file. And here you find it's kind of like similar to, it looks like JSON, but it's JavaScript or TypeScript, I guess, in this case. And it's just kind of like a description of how this form should look like. And then we do the heavy lifting of replacing that with actual fields and UI and stuff. Um, and in the other CMSs, you will probably have like a click and drag kind of situation and so on to kind of do the same. But we decided that it makes sense to have this in code because you're deciding the data model. You're deciding how the data should look like that we are going to integrate in an app or website. And if someone changes that suddenly, your web or web page or app will kind of break, and that's not great if you have like a lot of business stake on it and so on. So it makes sense to have it in code. Having it in kind of TypeScript or JavaScript also makes like a lot of opportunity for customization and so on. So if you want to have like a form validation, you can use JavaScript to kind of like decide if the data is correct or not. So you don't have like to learn regex again to do the same. You can just use JavaScript, and it's pretty powerful. So it's convenient, and you can use kind of your developer tooling to make more stuff. So if I wanted an excerpt, I can't spell when I do live coding. Let's see. Fortunately, Copilot can. Now I was just save this file, and the Studio hot reloaded and gave me an excerpt field, and I can make that a text box to make it a bit more accommodating for editors. And that's it. And now we can use it. And again, what happens behind the scenes is that we are syncing this data to a document store. So it's instantly available for you to query wherever you want it. And the data is like JSON. It looks like this. So there's like a title, excerpt, and that is what you consume in your website. This is kind of pretty top of the iceberg, but that's basically how Sanity works in a lot of ways. Do you agree, Carolina?
I do agree.
Yeah, thanks. Carolina does this every day almost, right? So I have to look to her. There's a bunch of other things. You can also have references between documents that we index, which means when you query this stuff, you can kind of like join data and all of that things. So it's a lot of like convenience here for people who want to build with content. Right. Now, I'm trying to get to kind of the global content part, because what we see here is the posts. Like post is an entry, you tend to have at least 2 or 3 of them. Because you were so tired after building the blog, you can't write or something. But it's a pretty typical content model thing, like posts and authors and categories. And this is another thing that we do a lot of at Sanity. We try to get people out of kind of like thinking about websites as a collection of just pages. That's interesting when you see look at kind of like front-end frameworks, they're very page oriented. Like make a markdown file for that page and some front matter, and then you make that page and so on. But in the real world and kind of like today, your content are supposed to kind of like float around in the web experience, and like we have cards and like connections and blah blah blah. So that warrants that you think a bit differently about content. And what we tend to say, like content should be thought of as data. Like you should be able to do with content like what the data you are dealing with in databases. So like, let's have more databases stuff for content. But in order for that to work, you can't kind of like store rich text as HTML, because then you get a blob of HTML and it sucks to kind of deal with that. So then we need to invent a specification for how to store rich text as JSON, because then it's possible to actually parse and so on. And one way this page-oriented kind of like thing in frameworks shows is when you are supposed to deal with kind of content that's not beholden to a page. And now I'm getting to the global thing. And it can be pretty simple. Like think about like the page title. No, sorry, I'm doing it. The site title or site metadata, or the kind of like the little thing that should be in the footer, or the navigation. There's like a bunch of this content that tends to be kind of like across the website. And in a lot of frameworks, you don't get kind of like a neat way to integrate that with the CMS. Up to very, very recently, Next would kind of tell you to kind of like hack it around it, and then you had to opt out of the static thing. Other frameworks is like, yeah, just like save a JSON file in the repo with all of that information and call it a day. But that then it gets kind of like unavailable for people who don't want to do stuff in GitHub, which is a lot of people who aren't coders. So this comes up like quite a lot in the community and customers, and we're trying to figure out what are neat patterns to kind of like go around that. And doesn't need to be very complicated. What I did here is to make like a document type called settings. It could be anything, it can be like metadata, my app, whatever. Settings was kind of like intuitive, and then I gave it a field called title. And in the studio, we now have settings as a document type. I can make a new thing, and I can say my blog. And hopefully this can become kind of like the single source of truth of what becomes the title of my blog. So far, so good. All right. Then we can dive into remix. Ooh, that was a lot. So remix. I learned from talking to you before, not everyone is like super comfortable or super familiar with it. Remix comes with some like a routing system that's expressed through how you can like put files in this routes folder. That kind of decides how your URLs will look like on your site. And following kind of like old server conventions, like the file that will be loaded when you hit kind of like your root URL is called index. And here you can like decide how this front page should look like. So here you can kind of like see welcome to Remix and the blinks and stuff. Since we have a blog, we want kind of like some single pages for the blog posts. So we have like, I want like a post and then kind of like this slug to the blog. So then I made kind of like this thing in Remix. I'm not sure how much I should unpack, but this lets me kind of like load single blog posts, and this lets me have like an index over blog posts. So I can try and does this work now? Go to slash posts. Hopefully it, yeah, you didn't use up the demo god. So yeah, this is silly. It's not even Tailwind. It's just kind of like some CSS that I found on the web. But yeah, there's a list of posts, and you can click them and get into the individual post, which is the same thing. But yeah, you can see here if I do this, that now I'm inside of a post, and it loads this slug thing. And here you can see it's a pretty basic HTML setup. So it would be neat to have some navigation over it and so on. And what you can do with Remix is pretty neat. You can kind of like wrap these templates that you see here inside of like a parent template. And this is basically one of the things that Next launched yesterday, like layout routes, but Remix had it from the start. Good one, Remix. So what you can do here is to go into this root, and this is kind of like the HTML that is loaded for everything that's under it. So all of these other files are loading this root. And then I've cheated a bit. So you saw some of this in Andre's talk, but Remix has this really neat abstraction for getting some data and getting it into your template. And it's called loader or loader function. And what I do now is just to return a simple kind of like data object. And then I get it into the React template with this use loader data that you saw a lot of in the last talk. And then we can, for example, pass that into kind of like a header thing. So just use this object property here. And then we have like remix plus sanity in this heading thing. Pretty simple and neat. Now I want kind of like to fetch this data though and replace this static thing with that. That takes us back to sanity and what we do. So because it's always hard to present this, but we basically made a query language, not because we had like wanted to, but we had to. Back in 2016, GraphQL was launched, but it was kind of like not doing it for us. It was too restrictive. So we wanted a way to kind of like make it possible to query basically anything we had in kind of like the document store and take it into any kind of like any shape that you needed. So we made a query language called Grok. And you see an example of Grok here. It is this string. If you haven't seen Grok before, which most of you haven't, it looks weird, probably, but it has a logic to it. So this star is representing all your documents. That's everything. It's like select star from table, right? And then we have these brackets, and they are representing something we call a filter. So it's kind of like an if statement, right? And inside of it, you can have an expression like and say like, in this case, I want any document that has the ID site settings, which I know that happens to be just one document because IDs are unique. But it can also be like underscore type post, and I will only get any document that has the underscore type post. Or it can be title a post. So you can basically filter by any property in a JSON document, even if it's nested in arrays and so on, and get those documents back. So you're not kind of like beholden to just querying a type of thing, but you can query across any property, which is pretty powerful. What this filter returns is an array of documents. In this case, I just want the one, so that's why this isn't kind of like an array selector thing. And in this case, I will just get the whole document, but I also know that I just want the title. Yeah, I actually will just want the title. And this is pretty similar to what you have in GraphQL. If you have used that, we can kind of specify which field you want. And then I saved, and I think I have to then uncomment this. Let's see. Oh, and I have to comment that. So what I do here is to import a client that knows where the Sanity data is. It has kind of the project ID and the data set. And I have to reload perhaps. Oops. Demo gods. Let's see. What happened? Oh, I'm in the meta function. If you see the answer, just tell me. Yeah. Can you actually read the error message? That's a good one. Null louder and it is null. I get nil back. Woo. It worked when I did it. Oh, maybe I should do it like this. Let's see. Let's clean out this. It is. Yeah, I knew that the first demo went too well, and now I'm paying for it, right? So, okay. Let's do this calmly. So, here we have client fetch. It has the thing. I'm asking for it to log the data, and it's null. So then I know that it doesn't get the data for some reason. And that's because, oh, I know it. It is because this ID is this thing, but I was assuming it was from my preparation, and then I deleted the document. So if I replace this with that, it should magically maybe work. Yes. And that's how you debug. It was actually planned. Yeah. And here you can see that we have like our first super simple global content pattern. Like we can actually now call this blog something else. And now it's called something else. This is now a pause for applause, right? Oh. So that's kind of like super neat. Again, very simple example. But what's also neat with like how Remix has done their APIs is that it's also kind of like easy to get that thing elsewhere, because one thing is the H1 on the page, you also want that in your meta tags, because that's what Google reads and Twitter reads and so on. So Remix has this meta thing. And the convention here is like if you export a variable with exactly this name, then Remix knows that they can pick up that kind of like whatever comes from that and insert it the right place. So in this case, they have like this meta thing, and if you return this type of object with a title in it, you can also see that the title in my tab is the same, because it comes into so little screen state. It comes into the head and the title. So that's pretty neat. Then we can do the same with the footer, right? Ooh. And now we have the same in footer. I'm tempted to do like this. Everyone who has done PHP or like WordPress development knows this joke, I guess. Every year, new year, you forget to update the thing. Oh, I'm forgetting myself. Shout out to the date functions, by the way. There we go. Super neat. Okay, sorry. I wanted to kind of like live code how to set up navigation with this pattern, and I think it's too much looking like reading the room. But any questions so far? Does it seem like doable? Thumbs up. Okay, great. Yes, server-side rendered as well. I think you can actually do view source, right? and that will actually be, well, a lot of JavaScript. What did I do wrong? Or is it because it is a dev mode? Yeah, no, maybe, oh, it's not wrapped. There we go, yeah. So there's actual HTML here. Very neat. Okay. Yeah, but like again, in these files, the same pattern. There's a grok query. Here we are filtering on post, and we are filtering by the slug. And then we are getting all the fields, and I'm also here joining the author field, because the author field here is a reference. Let's see. Dung. So you can see that I've made a reference to an author, and that's not easy to see when I don't have more. Boom. So this is another document that kind of describes the author, and here we have the post. And if we go into the data object again, you can see that author here is just a reference to the other document. And that is what I'm kind of like joining in this grok query and getting back kind of like all the data, so I can use it inside of the template. Right, I think I will kind of like call it a day, unless there are any questions. Right. So yeah, go to Sanity.io, get started and try it out. And tell us if you hit any snags or have questions or whatever. Yeah, thank you for listening. Let me quickly check if there's any questions on the chat. Sorry.
Are we still sponsoring?
We are still sponsoring Syntax FM. I don't think we have reached all their listeners quite yet. But yeah. And also in December we are releasing kind of like the new studio that you saw some demo of here. Yes, we released a new next starter that you aren't interested in now. I was just kidding. But yeah, the new studio is just a React dependency, so you can pretty much import it anywhere and have like a CMS in your application, including Remix and so on. Yeah, that's true. So yeah, that's it. Should we hang around for the stream, Eric?
I don't know.
Shrug, Eric. Yeah, I think we can probably close the stream. Thank you all for watching on the stream as well. Remix Bay Area will be back. All right. Toodaloo.